Every night at exactly 2 a.m., I'd hear the basement door close. Not slam, close. Carefully, the way someone closes a door when they don't want to be heard. For 3 weeks, I told myself it was the house settling, or my son-in-law checking the water heater, or any of a dozen reasonable explanations a man of 68 years finds when he doesn't want to believe what his gut is already telling him. Then one night, I stopped making excuses and followed the sound. What I found in that basement didn't just break my heart. It told me everything I needed to know about the man my daughter had married, and about why he'd been so eager to have me move in. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from, and whether you think you would have done the same thing I did. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in late October. I was sitting on my back porch in Knoxville, drinking coffee and watching the last of the leaves come down from the maple my wife Dottie had planted the year we bought the house. Dottie had been gone 4 years by then, and the maple had grown big and wide, and some mornings just looking at it was enough to get me through the day. My daughter's name came up on my phone. "Daddy," she said, and something in her voice pulled me upright before she'd gotten another word out. She always called me Dad, never Daddy. Not since she was maybe 9 years old. "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." A small laugh, a little too quick. "I just miss you, we both do. And we've been talking, Theo and I have been talking, about whether you might want to come stay with us for a while. The house is so big, Daddy. We have that whole second floor, and you'd have your own bathroom, a sitting room, everything." Theo got on the line then. My son-in-law's voice was warm and easy the way it always was, smooth as a car salesman's but with just enough roughness underneath to seem genuine. He said they'd been worried about me living alone. Said the neighborhood in Knoxville was changing. Said my daughter cried sometimes thinking about me rattling around that empty house by myself. I almost said no. I should have said no. But my daughter came back on and she said, "Daddy, Mom would have wanted you close to family," and that was that. 3 weeks later, I was standing in the driveway of a colonial in Asheville with my 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of books, watching my son-in-law carry everything inside, like it was the easiest thing in the world to be generous. He was 34, fit, good-looking in a way that still surprised me even after 6 years of him being part of the family. He coached youth soccer on weekends. He volunteered at the food bank every Thanksgiving. He made a point, every single time I'd visited over the years, of pulling out my chair at dinner before he pulled out my daughter's. The house was beautiful, real hardwood floors, a kitchen that opened onto a back deck, a neighborhood where people walked their dogs in the evenings and waved to each other. My room upstairs had a window seat and a view of the Blue Ridge in the distance. My daughter had put fresh flowers on the dresser. "We're so glad you're here," she said, squeezing my hand. Her smile reached her eyes. I thought, I made the right call. The first week was easy, warm even. My daughter made biscuits on Saturday morning, real ones, from scratch, the way her mother used to. My son-in-law and I watched football together Sunday afternoon, and he knew enough about the history of the game to make the conversation worth having. He asked about my career, 31 years as an electrician, the last 12 running my own small crew, and he listened in the way people do when they're genuinely interested, not just being polite. Some evenings, the 3 of us sat on the back deck until it got cold, and my daughter would lean against her husband's shoulder, and I'd think about Dottie, but in a good way. The missing her kind, not the losing her kind. Then the second week started, and something changed, not all at once. Just the way a room changes when one lamp goes out. You don't notice immediately, you just notice that things are darker than they were. My daughter had always been a talker. Since she was a little girl, she could fill any silence, any room, any long car ride. Now she was quiet at dinner. Not sad quiet, exactly. Careful quiet. She measured her words before she let them out, the way you measure your step on ice. She checked my son-in-law's face when she spoke, just a flicker, the way you glance at a dog you're not sure about. I told myself she was tired. She worked full-time as a dental hygienist, long days on her feet. I told myself I was projecting, that a man who'd spent 4 years in an empty house was bound to read shadows into everything. Then I noticed she'd stopped wearing short sleeves. It was a warm fall in Asheville, the kind of October where you can still sit outside in a flannel shirt. My daughter wore long sleeves every day, turtlenecks, a cardigan over a long-sleeved blouse. I mentioned it once casually and she said she ran cold, always had. But I remembered every summer of her childhood. I remembered her in tank tops at the pool, in t-shirts with the sleeves cut off, complaining any time she had to wear anything with more coverage than necessary. My daughter didn't run cold. I kept watching. My son-in-law was different at home than he was in the world. I don't mean that the way people mean it when they mean someone's fake. It was more subtle than that. In the world, he was expansive, easy, quick to laugh. At home, he was precise, particular. He had a way of commenting on things that sounded like observation but landed like criticism. The chicken's a little dry tonight. The living room feels cluttered. Did you change the way you're doing your hair? He never raised his voice, never had to. I watched my daughter get smaller. It happened slowly enough that maybe she didn't feel it happen. But I was watching from the outside, and I could see it the way you see a plant that isn't getting enough sun. Not dying, exactly, just bent towards something that isn't there. The basement door first woke me on a Thursday. I'd gotten up to get a glass of water around 2 in the morning. The house was quiet, the way old houses get quiet at night. Every sound its own small presence. I was heading back to bed when I heard it. The soft, mechanical click of a door latch, followed by the whisper of weather stripping. Careful, deliberate. I stood in the hallway and listened. Nothing after that. No footsteps coming back up, no murmur of a television, nothing, just the house settling again. In the morning, I mentioned it at breakfast, keeping my voice easy. Must have had the water heater kicking on last night. Woke me up a little. My son-in-law glanced up from his phone. Yeah, the pressure's been running high. I've been meaning to have someone look at it. My daughter kept her eyes on her coffee. The second night, the same sound, the same time. 2 a.m., give or take a few minutes. I lay there in the dark, trying to work out what bothered me about it. A man who can't sleep goes to the kitchen, goes to his office, watches television. He doesn't go to the basement at 2 in the morning and close the door carefully behind him, not unless he doesn't want to be heard. The third night I waited. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed at 1:30, and I listened. I'd spent 31 years reading buildings, understanding where the current ran, where the pressure lived, what sounds meant trouble, and what sounds were just the world doing its ordinary business. I knew how to be still and listen. At 2:04, the basement door. I gave it 90 seconds, then I got up. The hallway was dark. I moved slowly, in socks, one hand on the wall, the same way I used to move through job sites before the lights were run. The basement door was at the end of the kitchen, past the island, past the pantry. The floor was cold tile under my feet. The door was closed but not latched, just barely resting in the frame. I could hear voices. Not a television, 2 people. One voice low and even, the other quieter, smaller. Then silence. Then the smaller voice again, with a shape to it that I recognized before I could name it. The shape of someone trying not to cry. I pushed the door open 2 inches. The basement was lit by a single work light mounted on a stand, the kind I'd used 100 times on job sites. It threw everything into hard yellow light and deep shadow. My son-in-law stood with his arms crossed, watching my daughter sit on the concrete floor against the far wall. She had her knees pulled up to her chest. She was in a nightgown, and even from the doorway I could see her arms, bare for the first time since I'd arrived. And I could see the bruising. Old bruising, yellow-green at the edges the way bruises go when they're healing, and newer marks, darker, on her forearms and the inside of her left wrist. Say it again, my son-in-law said. His voice was quiet. Conversational. If you believe it, you should be able to say it. I'm sorry, my daughter said, not a whisper, something below a whisper. I didn't mean to embarrass you. You told your coworker that I work too much. You told her that in front of 3 other people. Do you understand how that makes me look? I know, I'm sorry. Get up. She stood. Slowly, the way someone stands when everything hurts. Now go wash your face and come back to bed. And tomorrow you're going to call her and tell her you were exaggerating. He turned toward the stairs, and I stepped back against the wall and stopped breathing. His footsteps went up past me in the dark. I was standing in the shadow beside the pantry, and I heard him go down the hall and into their bedroom and close the door. I stood there in the dark for a long time. My daughter came up 2 minutes later. She didn't see me. She moved down the hallway like a person walking in her sleep, quiet and careful, and she went into the bedroom and closed the door the same way he had. Careful, so as not to be heard. I went back to my room and I sat on the edge of my bed and I didn't sleep again. I sat there thinking about the bruises on my daughter's arms. I thought about every dinner where she'd measured her words. Every morning she'd come downstairs already braced for something. Every time she'd laugh just a little too quickly at something he said. I thought about how long she'd been living in that basement at 2 in the morning. I also thought about something I'd noticed 3 days earlier that hadn't made sense until now. I'd been looking for a pen in my son-in-law's home office. I needed to leave myself a note, and I couldn't find one in my room. And I'd seen a folder on his desk, partially open. I hadn't looked at it closely. I hadn't thought to. In the morning, while my son-in-law was at work and my daughter was on a shift, I went back to that office. The folder contained printed emails. 3 of them, addressed to a name I didn't recognize, a financial planner or an attorney. I wasn't certain which. The emails discussed a property in Knoxville, my property, my house. There was language in those emails I recognized from my years dealing with contractors and permits and the bureaucratic end of the trades. Power of attorney, medical evaluation, diminished capacity. My hands went cold. There were printed screenshots of text messages too. Messages between my son-in-law and someone he called his brother. One message read, "The old man settled in fine. Once we get the evaluation done, it's straightforward." Another, "She won't say anything. She knows better." I stood in that office for a long time, holding those papers. He hadn't invited me to Asheville because he was worried about me. He'd invited me because I owned a paid-off house in Knoxville and a retirement account with 22 years of savings in it. And because an elderly father-in-law living under his roof was one medical evaluation away from being a legal dependent. He'd separated me from my life in Knoxville the same way he'd separated my daughter from her coworkers, her friends, her mother's family. Carefully, with good reasons that sounded like kindness. I photographed every document with my phone before I put them back. Then I went back to my room and I called my old attorney in Knoxville. He'd handled Dottie's estate. He knew my situation, knew my finances, knew me. I told him what I'd found. He didn't waste time with disbelief. He told me to photograph everything I could access safely, to document my own competency with a medical evaluation from my physician back home, and to call him again as soon as I had it all. "And your daughter?" he asked. "I'm working on that." The hardest conversation of my life was not the one I had with my son-in-law. The hardest was the one I had with my daughter. I chose a Tuesday morning, a week later, when she had a day off and my son-in-law had back-to-back client meetings until 6. I made coffee and I set 2 cups on the kitchen table, and I sat down and waited until she sat across from me. "Sweetheart," I said, "I need to tell you what I saw." I watched her face go through 4 or 5 things in about 2 seconds. Denial came first. I could see her pulling it up like a shield. Then something cracked behind it. Her eyes filled. "Daddy, I'm not here to scare you. I'm not going to do anything that makes things worse for you. But I need you to know that I know, and I need you to know that I'm not going anywhere until you're safe." She cried for a long time, the way people cry when they've been holding it for years. I sat with her and I didn't try to stop it or fix it or talk through it. I just let her cry until she was ready to talk. It had started, she told me, about 18 months into the marriage. Small things first, criticisms that felt like concern, rules that felt like preferences. Then it escalated the way these things do, so slowly she hadn't recognized it as a pattern until she was already deep inside it. The basement wasn't the only place. There had been other things. Worse, she hadn't told anyone because she was ashamed, and because he'd told her no one would believe her, and because she'd started to believe him. She didn't know about the financial scheme. When I showed her the photographs of the emails, she sat very still for a long time. "He invited you here so he could take everything from both of us," she said. "That's what it looks like." She looked at me with her mother's eyes. "What do we do?" "We do this carefully," I said, "and we do it together." We spent the next 2 weeks building a case. My daughter borrowed a digital recorder from a coworker and kept it in her cardigan pocket during the times his control came out. The recordings were clear enough. We documented her injuries with photographs, timestamp. I wrote a detailed account of what I'd witnessed in the basement, signed and dated, and emailed it to my attorney and to a second copy in a cloud account my son-in-law didn't know existed. My attorney connected us with a domestic violence advocate in Asheville named Rosa, who worked with the county sheriff's office. She met us twice at the public library, in a private study room, while my son-in-law thought we were browsing the stacks. Rosa was matter-of-fact and thorough and exactly what we needed. She helped my daughter prepare an emergency protection order filing and arranged emergency housing with a shelter 20 minutes away. Detective Wynn at the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office took our case. He'd handled financial exploitation of elders before, and he moved on the documentation with the kind of quiet efficiency that told me he'd seen this kind of scheme and knew how it tended to end. "When you're ready," he told me, "we'll be ready." We chose a Friday. My daughter served him with divorce papers at 7 in the evening, when he'd been home long enough to pour a drink and settle into the idea that the day was done. I was sitting in the living room. I'd told Rosa I would stay, not to intervene, but to witness. Detective Wynn had a unit parked on the street. My son-in-law read the first page of the papers and went very quiet. That was almost scarier than if he'd shouted. He set his glass down with slow, deliberate care. "What is this?" Not a question. A statement, flat and cold. "I'm leaving," my daughter said. Her voice shook a little, but she held it. His eyes moved to me. I'd never seen that expression on him before. The careful warmth was completely gone. What was underneath it was something else entirely. "You did this," he said. "My daughter did this," I said. "I helped." He moved toward her, and I was on my feet before I understood I'd stood up, and the front door opened at the same moment, Detective Wynn and 2 deputies already inside before my son-in-law could process what was happening. He was calm during the arrest, controlled. He looked at my daughter with an expression I'll carry in my memory for the rest of my days, because it had no anger in it. Only calculation. Only the look of a man filing information away for later. But there wasn't going to be a later, not the kind he was planning. The case took 5 months to reach trial. The financial fraud charges moved separately from the domestic violence charges, and both of them moved with the kind of momentum that builds when the evidence is comprehensive, and the defendant's attorney is working against facts rather than doubt. The recordings my daughter had made were entered into evidence. My eyewitness account of the basement, the medical documentation of her injuries, the emails about the power of attorney scheme, my own medical evaluation confirming full cognitive competency, the testimony of Rosa from the shelter, and of a neighbor who'd heard things through the fence on 2 separate occasions, and had never said anything until my daughter's attorney called. The DA offered a plea deal, and my son-in-law turned it down. I sat in the courtroom every day. My daughter sat with her attorney at the plaintiff's table, and she was the straightest I'd ever seen her sit. The judge sentenced him to 7 years for the domestic violence charges, with the financial fraud counts running concurrent. Full restitution. Permanent protective order. The court appointed a guardian ad litem to review all financial matters connected to both my property and my daughter's assets, which my son-in-law had been quietly shifting for the better part of a year. Every penny came back. My daughter didn't go back to the colonial after that. She found a rental in a neighborhood close to the hospital where she'd gotten a new position. A small craftsman with a front porch and a yard with enough sun for a garden. I helped her move in on a Saturday in April, and we ordered pizza and sat on the porch floor because she hadn't gotten furniture yet, and she laughed more in those 3 hours than I'd heard her laugh in all the months I'd been in Asheville. I went back to Knoxville in May. The maple was putting out new leaves, and the house didn't feel as empty as I'd expected. I'd been afraid of that, afraid of coming back to the quiet and finding it heavier than before. But something had shifted. The quiet felt like mine again. My daughter calls me every Sunday morning now. Real calls, long ones, the kind where we talk about nothing much. What she's cooking, what I'm watching, whether the tomatoes I planted are going to make it. Last week she called on a Thursday too, just because she'd heard a song on the radio that her mother used to like, and she wanted to tell me about it. I think about the night I followed that sound to the basement stairs. I think about standing in the dark in my socks, hand on the wall, listening. I've been asked since then whether I was afraid in that moment, and the honest answer is that I was. But it was the kind of fear that clarifies instead of freezes. The kind that tells you exactly what you have to do next. You spend enough years in the trades. You learn to trust that feeling. When something's wrong, you don't walk away from it. You find the source. You fix it. That's what she needed. Not a rescue. Not someone to swoop in and take over. She needed someone who would stand still in the dark long enough to see clearly and then say, "I see it. I believe you. And I'm not leaving until this is done." If there's someone in your life who needs to hear those words, don't wait as long as I almost did. The cost of silence is always higher than it looks.